our participants talking a little bit about what they do in a little bit more depth in that wonderful introduction. And then we're going to jump in and talk about how do we define VR and AR, just so that we all have a base, and then we're going to jump in and try to get some arguments going amongst these fellows. I'm delighted to be here. I think I was here at the Pulse conference last year, and it's good to see a number of faces that were here last year. And so why don't we start, DJ, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and kind of give us the 2-minute quickie, okay?
Sure. Thank you. I'm with DJ Roller with NextVR, my co-founder, and we're really a company that we started about 6.5 years ago with a vision towards whether it's 3D or stereo television, theatrical films, or virtual reality, there'd be a greater and greater need to capture, compress, transmit, and ultimately deliver content in a very high quality and efficient way. So our company is really around a format that we've developed for virtual reality to be able to do that.
So we're going to get into that format question in a minute, but Jake?
So I work typically on movie trailers. It's the core of our business. Movie, video game, TV trailers. So we take the approach of how can VR serve as an extension of that? How can we use it to advertise the actual core content, but also expand upon it and give people something new that they can actually seek out on their own and enjoy regardless of the source of it. So we're kind of living in a world of content creation, but also advertising, and sort of straddling that line.
So it'll be interesting to talk about whether you do it before the film comes out or after the film comes out. Which one is mostly before now, or is it after?
I mean, it's usually tied to the release, but more and more commonly we're seeing either an extension of the piece come out with a home entertainment, or even waiting for home entertainment. So it's something to advertise to get people to buy the Blu-ray.
Right, extend the franchise if there's a sequel for a successful film. David?
So I oversee the creative within the Fox Innovation Lab on the Fox lot not too far from here. And you know, our goal really is to basically be pushing the envelope and creating the very, very best content out there in the VR space. We started doing some R&D with a project that was tied to the film, feature film Wild, which I was the executive overseeing that movie. And we were able to work with filmmakers and VR storytellers from Montreal named Felix and Paul, who are directors who are really specializing in the medium. And we created the very first sort of live action narrative VR experience with major motion picture stars in it. That premiered at Sundance last year. We then went full bore into working on what we felt was sort of where the technology was going, and that next project was The Martian, and tied to The Martian, it's the Martian VR Experience. We actually worked with very closely with Ridley Scott and the virtual reality company, and it was directed by Robert Stromberg. That piece is a 25 to 30 minute fully interactive narrative piece that allows the participant to be in the actual shoes and suit in a first-person perspective of Mark Watney from the film. And that then went to CES this year, and I just got back from Sundance yesterday, where it premiered to the public and did really well. So I'm very happy to be here and talk to you guys more about what we're up to.
Joel.
So The Martian, directed by Rob Stromberg, my partner Rob and I went down a couple summers ago and saw Oculus, kind of before there was any real public awareness or knowledge of it. And that day, Rob's insight was, with all of this capital and incredible innovation going on the hardware side, it's going to take artists to really create great content for it. So we're very technology agnostic at the virtual reality company, but we're all about creating really premium, really high-end artwork and bringing in really established artists like Rob. We're doing Steven Spielberg's first VR project, and we're working with Cirque du Soleil on some original series. And so we're really trying to create that content worthy of all the amazing innovation that's happened on the technology side.
So, show of hands real quickly. How many people have seen the film The Martian? You've won almost everybody here. How many of you have actually seen something in virtual reality? So I don't think we're going to have to define it much. So let's start with talking about where virtual reality is today, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about where it's going. Does one of you want to give a quick summary of what's happening in terms of all the different, there's so many companies out there saying they're doing this and that. Let's talk about the head-mounted displays and the platforms. How many platforms are out there that are, call them credible? One of you guys want to take a shot at that?
Well, you have, I mean, there's a couple things we have to sort of, to set the stage, we need to think a little bit about where virtual reality is, sort of first touches are for the consumer. So first and foremost, everybody in this room has access to virtual reality, everyone, and will essentially for free. Because obviously mobile and the mobile device that's in your pocket is a virtual reality, potentially a virtual reality viewer. Google Cardboard, which many of you may have received with your New York Times subscription or can very easily get on Amazon.com for not very much money. That is the kind of gateway drug, we could call it, to sort of the richer.
That's for YouTube, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are experiences that are on it that are very compelling,
Yeah.
but it's the sort of the base level. And then if you move up in mobile, the next step would be Samsung's Gear VR, which is also a mobile platform and is designed specifically for Samsung phone, which you can get at Best Buy now for $99. Okay, but that has to be paired with your Samsung mobile device. Then we step from mobile to the next level, which is essentially tethered. Okay, the tethered platforms, the three big tethered platforms are Oculus, which a lot of people here probably hear most about, PlayStation VR, which used to be called Project Morpheus, and the third is HTC Vive, which runs on the Steam engine. The difference between mobile and the tethered systems is profound. And so, and the cost differentiation between mobile and the tethered is profound. And so it's important to make sure when we're talking about this during the conversation today, that we refer to what is mobile and what is tethered, because they're very, very different. Mobile is mostly, in terms of video content or gaming content, at least with video, you're usually in a fixed position. There isn't a huge amount of interactivity that we're starting to see more of it. Tethered actually allows the participant in Oculus or in Vive to actually move around the virtual space and to have agency within that. So in The Martian, you can actually control things, move things, and you can see your hands, you can walk around a virtual environment. Very, very different from mobile, and arguably, you know, if you're a true VR purist, much more about virtual reality than 360 capture.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, going to set the stage also in today, just where we are today. How big is the installed base of the tethered systems that are out there? Because obviously the Martian is a tethered system. Is working off a tethered system. How many people could actually experience it today?
Well, those three systems are all becoming commercially available
Becoming.
later this year.
Right.
Right.
They're not commercially available yet.
So, in effect, what you've done is this extraordinary virtual reality experience for Sundance and such that you have to be an insider to go play with right now.
Today, I mean,
Yeah.
it'll be one of the premium experiences in the store the day Oculus ships to you. You know, the day you get your Vive or the day a PlayStation owner plugs in a VR headset, it'll be one of those premium experiences. And the truth is, it took a long time to make that. And in one of our original decks, all those headsets were out last Christmas. You know, all of those companies have delayed a bit, which we can't control. But for us, it's like we're making stuff now that won't be polished, won't be finished. You know, even the 3 months to really get it right. Stuff that we will be releasing in 2017, 2018 even, some of the stuff I'm working on today. So we're looking at that install base, not from a standpoint of, oh, that's way in the future, but it's like, that's even how long it's going to take us to even get the project done.
Right.
This is the extraordinary point of this, having a panel about virtual reality. It's all coming. And we're, you know, you guys, and I would love to say I am, but I'm not, are all producing something for a platform or a series of platforms that are about to be delivered, which is really amazing because these platforms get tweaked and changed and such, and you're developing software for something that's still not set.
Well, that's actually something that I encounter a lot, where the main thing that I built in public was the VR experience for Sony Pictures, The Walk, which is a retelling of Man on Wire. So the real life story of French acrobat who walked across a tightrope between the two towers.
Did you actually try it?
The VR?
No, the walk.
Oh no, God! You know what?
Virtually.
So I've done the virtual one hundreds of times. It doesn't affect me at all anymore.
Anymore? But you
No,
sweated
but
the first
then
time.
I went to. Oh yeah. Well, what we did actually the very first time to figure out whether we could do it or not, we just built a really quick, rough, gray box model, but to scale, so 1,000 feet in the air, with a cityscape down below. And I still remember when I leaned over for the first time, my stomach tightened. And I was like, all right, good, this is going to work. We can do this. But when we actually started development on it, it was almost a year ago at this point, and it was for the PlayStation VR. And so at the time, I mean, there were very few tools available for it. And every month something new would come, and we had to retarget constantly, whether it's changing headsets. In the middle of it, the new Morpheus model came out, so we had to redo that. And you'd think it'd be as easy as just plug in, change a driver or whatever, and you're good. It's not even close to that. So there's a constantly moving target, and you're developing for it. And for us, I think all on the stage, we all have a real responsibility of kind of being good ambassadors for VR, since it's still new, and you don't want to give anybody an experience that's going to turn them off to the idea of VR. So again, like that, everybody has the idea of VR gets you sick. Like, you cannot let that happen. That's of the utmost importance. And if you're doing something on these essentially like beta hardware with beta software, you're going to have crashes, you're going to have bad performance, you're going to have all sorts of issues. And it's risky. You have to get it just right. And it's constantly moving.
Let's talk about the creative process. It's evolving. How fixed is it? And we talked about a number of tethered systems, and so you've got the HTC or the Sony, the Oculus, the Valve, or Steam. I guess they're coming up as a platform, and because they're a major player in the video space, of course. How difficult it is to make it for all of those different systems, and you've been making 3D films, and now you're becoming a pioneer in VR. Tell me about the process of, you just film it once and pray, or are you thinking about each system and how you film it, and you've got to do it a little differently?
It's a lot of work, but we have a big team and a growing team to do that. So part of our platform and our technology, or this format, is that you can shoot it once and really focus on the creative and know that it's going to play the way you intended or way you capture it, created across all the platforms. And so we're working across all the platforms we've mentioned, plus platforms that even I hadn't heard of 6 months ago, just because it's kind of a global thing.
So I would say, one thing that's really important to convey is that we are really at the birth of a new medium. So, nobody up here, though we are maybe, a few steps ahead of people who haven't experienced all of it, none of us up here would tell you what the quote-unquote rules within the creation of VR content are. What we can tell you is, here's what definitely doesn't work, right? Here's the thing that we did that we saw people get, basically get very sick or feel, uncomfortable, or it doesn't look good, or transitions are confusing. There are certainly things in terms of how close can you place a subject to the camera when you shoot in VR, and what does that do in terms of how we view the normal world and scale. There are things with regard to where your hands need to be within a specific space. There are things about horizon lines. But at the same time, when we first started, people said, well, you can't move the camera in VR because it'll make people sick. We've now proven that that's not true. As long as you're moving on a steady trajectory, or on a dolly, or on a crane, and even with a Steadicam, you can do that. People told us you can't edit, because in real life things aren't edited, right? We blink our eyes, and it's not the way you think about movies. The language of cinema evolved over literally, basically 100 years. We've seen, people sitting and looking at the filming at the beginning of cinema of theater, right? So you would essentially, a play would take place, and we would then film that, and that's what quote-unquote cinema was. Then, of course, we started to establish the language of cinema, which was wide shots and masters and close-ups and editorial and different styles. That's where we are now with VR. We're really at the very beginning of figuring out what that's going to be. And so the lab's responsibility, I think all of our responsibility, is essentially to find talented people out there who are kind of creating those rules, thinking really strategically and thoughtfully about what works, what doesn't work. And then of course there are going to be people, there will be Tarantinos and Coen brothers and Spielbergs of VR. I'm 100% confident of it. And, you know, coming back from Sundance, Sundance has a section called The New Frontier. The New Frontier 10 years ago was very, very fringe. It was essentially where filmmaking and new technologies were sort of playing with each other. And now you go, and there's literally lines out the door and down the street in Main Street in Park City for people who are going to see VR and AR installations. And in that space, there are storytellers who are solely focused on learning this medium. Some of them come from traditional filmmaking and TV, but a lot of them are people who are coming out of, you know, a garage in Iowa whose first real interest and passion has been VR, and that's what they're going to become focused on. So we're going to start seeing programs at UCLA and USC and NYU and Columbia that are VR only.
Are there published some of these learnings? Are these well known in the industry, or are they individual, each one of you four?
I think anything that would be written would be out of date probably
Yeah.
by the time it went to print.
Well, you can just update it daily.
Yeah, I mean, that's why there's what I find for information is just all these blogs. And it's what I find is this is, you know, we get the comment a lot from, you know, older, more seasoned people in the industry that are like, well, why isn't this just like 3D TV or whatever? And, you know, my response to that is always, well, you know, 3D TV was sort of kind of shoved at us from, you know, like the tech companies, and you know, there were good artistic uses for it that came from some pioneers, but it wasn't really a thing that was asked for, you know. And whereas I think VR has really started the opposite way. It's gone from the bottom, like literally dudes in their garage, you know, and the kind of enthusiast community around that, and then the larger companies have had to respond. And sometimes they're way more slow in doing that. And so, I mean, that's, I think, how Oculus has been. You know, they really are just tinkerers at the beginning.
Right.
That just were in it for the love of the game.
Yeah.
And now, you know, this is why I think there's a big groundswell of interest, because now we all think, like, this could be what we really want it to be. And not just like, hey, here's another $1,000 on this TV, you know, that you need to have.
Joel, is it every day you're learning?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of these panels, like we always emphasize, like, this is the birth of a brand new medium.
Right.
Like, if you look at innovations in cinema or in editing, like you say the Tarantino of VR, I always use Tarantino as almost an example of like the type of artistry and the type of filmmaker that he's really, you know, embraced all of those cinematic language innovations. Those are actually the primary innovations that get erased when you get into it. Like a VR scene of Django, you would have the artistry of the actors, you would have the artistry of the set design, but the way he cuts is actually the opposite of VR storytelling. Whereas like a film like Gravity, we could literally just right now spend millions of dollars and render a VR version of Gravity that would be incredible. But the only like, if there was going to be published, it would be like one paragraph, you know, as far as our insight so far of like what we've found to be an actual grammatical difference of VR storytelling, and we call it focal length of region of interest, because and it I think there's innovations in that space only in live performance, never in like film or TV. But like if you go to a Beyonce concert, there's that aha moment where all of a sudden she's behind you on like a second stage, or U2 does elaborate things where they use the space in a unique way. But with TV, it's like the box you're looking at stays the same shape, right? The focal length of your vision towards that box is, your attention is kind of at the same range, and then the focal length of the shot in that box is changing from close up to wide. Whereas like we did this documentary where we found that if you're in a VR environment that's primarily mundane with a celebrity who's very close to you telling a story, well, yeah, you can look all around you, but you mostly just stare at the celebrity, and it's like the novelty of looking around wears off pretty quickly, and then you almost slowly mentally zoom in more and more on the attention, especially if what they're saying gets more serious or if the lighting dims, and you're focusing more and more. But then in this case, it's a sports documentary where you're in a pretty mundane living room setting. He's talking about something, and the conversation turns quite serious, and you're going from looking at him to the TV, to him to the TV, and then all of a sudden the TV turns off and you're really focused on him. And what he's talking about is his reverence for the arena he plays in. And all of a sudden at that moment, the living room turns into the arena. And he's still sitting there. The fern and the family photo is still behind you, but this whole part of the rest of the room has become this epic arena. And like your attention focus goes from very narrow to very wide. And for us, it's like that's a good rhythm for about 10 seconds. But just doing this for 30 minutes is not that interesting. And so we go from that to an all black cut, like a really hard cut to all black. And then the light comes up and it's now a different interview, but it's very serious and then that cuts to all white, and there's something that's really funny that happens. And those rhythms of like looking all around, looking between two things, like in a conversation where you're looking at you and then looking at the crowd, versus moments where you're really focused on one little thing that flies in front of your eyes, that seems to be the first kind of rhythm you can actually chart. The way you would chart master, wide, or loud, quiet, or a painter would use dark and light colors. And it's kind of the first grammatical rhythm that we
Extremely interesting. I mean, you just got from one of the masters of VR just a little narrative on how to do it. So you feeling the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just as far as the ability for the medium, it is a whole new medium. It's the most immersive medium in the world.
Don't you find it, when I first started doing VR, I was an investor in Oculus, so I got to see it early, and I got to barf, because I hate to tell you, the first couple ones were really pretty brutal.
Motion sickness is completely, almost entirely a matter of frame rate.
Yeah.
And there is no consumer product that's going to ship with bad frame rates.
And I'm pretty strong.
I just always want to say that because like there's a headset called Ion from a guy in a garage in Idaho that completely eliminates frame rate based motion sickness no matter what phone you use. Now, if you do an experience that would make you sick in real life, it'll make you sick in VR life.
Yeah, but it's the emotional intensity. That's what always shocked me was I would be in there and I would feel drained. 15 minutes or 10 minutes of VR was, wow. I mean, I remembered every little thing of it. What I remembered was so amazing versus what I remember when I watched the video.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time. Memory is a really fascinating thing. I've had people after a year out. I saw people at Sundance this time and CES who a year later said when they say things like, "When I was in the wild experience with Laura Dern and Reese Witherspoon." Now, I've never heard anyone say when I was in the movie. And it's can be said for certainly the incredibly powerful work that's being done in documentary. I mean, if you look at what specifically, I don't know if you've seen Clouds Over Sidra, if anyone's seen any of the Chris Milk stuff, Clouds Over Sidra, which is in a Syrian refugee camp. I mean, what that can do to an audience who normally is reading the flat version of the New York Times version of that exact story, or watching the 60 Minutes piece, which could be a Peabody, Emmy Award-winning piece. But when you're actually in the refugee camp and you are faced with the immediacy and the intimacy of those experiences with the subjects, it's a very different emotional experience than watching a documentary, even a great documentary. And and you look at DJ's work. I mean, DJ came and saw us in the lab really early on, like right at the very beginning of all this. And the first thing he showed me was, I think it was a Golden State Warriors game. Was that what it was?
Maybe.
I remember. I think it was Steph Curry because I like Steph Curry. And I was like sitting on the floor at the game. And I still, this is 2 years ago, have a total memory of Steph Curry, that moment. I know exactly what I saw, and it was as if I remembered being at that game. Because I've never sat on the floor of an NBA game, ever. I've always wanted to, and now I have because he took, at that point I think it was a couple of red cameras, right? And so...
So maybe this is the secret to teaching. Maybe we can use VR to get these ADD teenagers to learn something. I'm just kidding.
I don't know.
So I'm going to go. I'm going to segue. That's another story for another day. Let's segue into the craziest thing you've seen so far. I'm going to say so far because this is the start. I mean, we all emphasize. What's just the wildest or craziest thing that you've seen in VR so far?
I don't have a great answer for that, but I will tell you in my own experience, as we were developing the walk, we had a version where you could actually explore this whole rooftop of the World Trade Center, like designed more like a traditional video game for exploration and finding. And when you do that, you have to build collision walls to say like, all right, you can walk to here and you stop, so you don't fall over the edge and you don't fall through the floor and all that. And there was like a 1 millimeter crack somewhere. And I walked out to the edge and I slipped through and I fell to the bottom, and it threw the headset off. Like, it was freaky. Like, it was, and that was, again, this was like a year ago. And I didn't expect to have such a visceral reaction to anything, because it was so kind of almost clinical at the time of like analyzing these boxes and all that.
But it scared you.
Yeah, and especially because it came out of nowhere. I didn't expect that. So it can shock your system really easily.
What's the wackiest or craziest thing you've seen in VR? Because
I can
VR
tell
is
you the
being done
worst.
for a lot of things. It's not just storytelling. I mean, there's a lot of other.
I'll tell you the worst. The worst.
The worst. Okay.
The worst idea, and it's appropriate because we're in a bit. This is. You guys are smart business people. I was at CES and I was getting on a plane, and this guy behind me was just going on and on and on about he was a big VR pioneer and entrepreneur, and I was like, I don't want to turn around, but I want to turn around. I want to know what he's talking about. And I started eavesdropping, and he worked for I think he said a small Lebanese bank, and he was building a VR app so that people could see their mortgage in VR. And I was like, that is the worst idea. I mean, we spent all day long thinking, okay, where would you like to go? Oh, I want to be on, if we could take people to Mars, if we could take people and decide a brain surgery, if we can take people and explore, and go on Tuscany. And he was like, no, mortgages. So there are, look, it's like everything, People always say like, well, don't you, obviously inevitably there will be an ethical consideration question that comes up on every panel that we do. And of course, we're very conscious of making sure that, as you said, we want to put, we want the medium to succeed.
Sure.
And we need to be thoughtful about what really is compelling and what's going to be good. But there are going to be questions about the use of the technology, just like there are questions about, the internet. Just like there are questions about media and pornography and violence and the intensity of the experience that you're talking about. If you if you felt like something was scary, if you watch a scary movie, a scary experience in VR is potentially traumatic. So we have a responsibility to really be thoughtful about that when you're creating content.
Yeah.
These types of things, the memory of that, the experience of that. So we've been really hoping and looking for people who are out there who are interested in doing good work.
Are any of you gamers?
Yes.
So talk about the gaming experience, because we talked a lot about storytelling and the movie experience, and most of what you've been doing is in the storytelling movie. Give the audience just a little bit about what's going on in the game space and sort of how that's progressing or not progressing.
What's good and bad about it is it's almost like there's a lot of crossover, and especially with any sort of interactivity. Like you could take a passive experience like a movie that you could shoot, but if you did it in some sort of gaming engine or environment where you can interact, that almost becomes a game in a way. At what point does interactivity become a game? And you don't want a game. The word game kind of talks down to it a little bit, which I hate. I wish it were a little more. It's just like, oh, it's just a game. Like, oh, you made that movie into a game. Like, it's not a board game. You're not just, it's different than that. So, with the gaming stuff, a lot of the times when I've shown people VR work, it's their first time doing VR, and they take it off, and they're like, dude, wouldn't that be dope for Call of Duty? And you're like, no, we've tried that. That's the worst thing you can do. Like, it's terrible. You can't rely on traditional gaming mechanics and just put a headset on and you're there. Like, it doesn't work. So they're in the true gaming world, they're doing the same thing that we're doing in entertainment or storytelling, where they have to find these new rules of what you can do and what you can't do. One of the early answers is, especially for sickness, so the biggest hurdle, and in my mind, the biggest hurdle right now is the locomotion. So, being able to move around an environment. You get plopped into a world in a normal game, you just hit up on the controller and you can walk around everywhere.
Right.
It doesn't really work that well in VR. You can do it, and like I said in the walk, we did that even.
You'll be pretty
but
sick
you
pretty
get a little
soon.
sick. Like
Yeah.
it sucks because that's what you want to do. So there's a lot of seated experience, a lot of what they call cockpit experiences, because that grounds you and it kind of gives you a little bit of freedom to move, but you're still there and not getting ill.
Yeah.
So I think actually the biggest hurdle still for VR in general, but first towards gaming, is just that exploration of the world and how do you actually accomplish that in a way that doesn't feel like point and click. Like,
Have you seen a game out or experienced one? Because again, we're on the Tethered, hasn't really come out. That you say, wow, they got it, or is it still kind of to be determined?
yeah, the first one that I saw that I was like, okay, this is gaming was a PlayStation VR experience called London Heist, where you literally, it's like a Guy Ritchie movie almost, where you sit down and there's this huge British bald gangster in front of you and he's kind of about to interrogate you and puts like a blowtorch in your face and all that. And then the boss calls him and he picks up the phone. He's like, he wants to talk to you. And you reach out with the controller and grab the phone and put it up to your ear. And you're holding, a PlayStation Move controller. It's just a cylinder. You feel like you're holding a phone, and it's in your ear. And then he tells you, I don't know what it is, but then you go into like a gunfight behind a desk, and you pull out clips from the drawers. You open the drawers, pull it in, click the gun, duck behind the desk, and shoot at these guys. And that was amazing to me. And this was, probably a year ago too. At this point that it came out,
It's been a while.
and it's still, I still remember that really clearly because I was in it and I got lost in it, and it's only 8 minutes or so, but it was action, it was story, and I was like, this, I would play this, I would buy that.
We're learning that one of the key words that you'll hear more and more about as VR becomes mainstream is the word presence. And presence is essentially the moment at which you have sort of tricked the brain into thinking that it no longer is here, it's in the virtual environment, right? And there are lots of different techniques and tricks that people are using. Obviously, fidelity and resolution is really, really important, and we're not there yet in terms of how clear the picture is. The actual motion within the experience, there's haptic feedback, which is another big factor we're starting to learn about, which is, if you walk towards a fire in virtual reality and you actually have a heat fan out, just a simple heat fan from, Costco, or a hairdryer even, and you feel that on your body, it tricks your brain into thinking it. Sense of smell. There's all sorts of little subtle things that we're doing. So trying to figure out ways to create those experiences that are really kind of creating a full sensory experience. That is how you sort of trick the brain into thinking.
So do any of you see something happening like in a mall where there's a little kiosk and you've got a really great
a
virtual
common
reality
conversation.
experience with the heat and
That too.
waves.
And also in the future, just home theaters in your house converting into virtual reality rooms and spaces that have those things in them as well, or they might be peripherals or add-ons to your tethered VR system.
The development of these 3 tethered platforms for the U.S. is very home focused, but
right.
in China, HTC's entire plan is more of a internet cafe type dynamic where there's going to be hundreds of their Vive VR systems in a place where people go to, because they live in really tiny apartments that they'll never have the room to do a VR room, but
And the internet cafe has been how
and it's
gaming
part of
started.
it's part of the culture there, where it's like there's going to be hundreds of millions of people in China that can just go pay a very small fee and jump into VR in a way that we're looking at the economics in the US going, oh, someone's going to have to pay $1,500 to have that system at home. I think even though you said you had a brief history with arcades, I think there is.
Oh, I think they're coming back.
Yeah,
I think the arcade is a perfect example. If I had an arcade still, which thank God I don't, this would be the #1 application because I think people would be lined up out of the street.
This is happening. You will see this in certainly in airports. You will see this in movie theaters. You will see this in There will be standalone places that are now, who knows what they are, but they're probably like e-cigarette stores. Those are going to turn into
Or the
VR
pop-up
stores.
store in a mall would be very easy to
Well,
do.
and you know what
Vape
what you actually have to keep in mind is, as we've talked about all these different like endpoints for content consumption, if it's a kiosk in a mall, or if it's on a Google Cardboard, or if it's in a movie theater lobby, or if it's a download at home, those are all really, you want different experiences for those. One of the things that I had to deal with a lot was, if I'm literally in a movie theater lobby doing this experience and trying to get people through, I can't make it 10 minutes long. I can't do 6 people an hour. That's pointless. So you have to keep it short. But then I wouldn't do that I wouldn't buy an experience that was 90 seconds long, for home. You have to really design it for where it's targeted.
Right.
And so I think a lot of what we're doing, and what we're seeing at least, is, you might have a smaller promotional experience that might last a couple of minutes that people can try, whether it's at like a trade show or a theater or whatever, where throughput is important. And then, something like another simple version of it for cardboard, because I can't do cardboard for more than a minute.
Yeah.
But then, as soon as my Oculus Rift arrives at home and I plug that in, I'm going to want it to be 20 minutes or more, and have some replay value.
So
that
let's
I can
talk
do
about the
over and
business
over.
model. You're jumping into it. So this is a business school, I guess, UCLA. And they're all going to start thinking about where's the money in this thing. So let's talk about where you guys think the business model is going to be. Is it going to be like the video game business, where you got a few platforms and people are selling software, renting? Where do you see it still? We're not even the first inning, but this is all visionary. Where do you see it going, DJ?
It's right now it seems, even at the early stages, that some of the low-hanging fruit out there on a business side is even things like sports. So there's already an appetite for people wanting to pay to go to a boxing match or a boxing ring, or to sit courtside at a game.
Or get beat up by Ronda Rousey or whatever.
Exactly. So I think it's going to evolve, and I'm not sure if it's just going to be some straight-up subscription like a Netflix per se. There may be options for that as well. So all those things are being explored by us and all of our partners right now. But it seems to be a real appetite for kind of across all that. But I also think there'll be a lot of advertising, free content as well.
There's going to be sponsor content.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
no question. The experience is just so powerful. Then people want the emotional tie-in with their
this being
brand.
the most powerful medium on the planet right now, even for a corporation to extend their brand and connect with audiences in a way they could never possibly do in any other medium.
But they have to have a large enough installed base, because advertising is also about reach.
It's interesting right now, even at the beginning of VR now, there's Fortune 50 companies that just want to be associated with, just because the press alone around them doing that is bigger than the install base that's out there.
The PR around the
Exactly.
talking about the app.
More people read about the Martian than experienced the Martian.
Yeah, I mean, the Innovation Lab at Fox takes a pretty different point of view about VR content, and that is that there is certainly going to be a huge influx of advertising dollars and corporate sponsorship that will drive the business for a time. But what we've seen is, even in the first few years of events like Comic-Con, and I'm sure some of you have already seen some of this downloaded onto your phones, there are a lot of experiences out there that you watch once, you look at it, you have that first maybe visceral reaction to it and say, wow, that was cool, or that was meh, or that made me sick. But I don't really want it. In all those scenarios, I'm not sure I'm going to do it again.
Yep.
Right? And then you're looking at what is essentially disposable content. It is essentially seeing an advertisement once, and then every time it comes up again during, after, or whenever, the Super Bowl is airing, you kind of go, yeah, I saw it, I'm tuned out. So our point of view at the lab is that we need to be driving and creating the best content, but that's repeatable content. Just like if you see a great film or you watch a great show, you jump into that world and you're excited to continue watching. A great Netflix
Or you're
show.
talking about a series.
I'm talking about a series where I'm
because
talking
you're
about.
not watching the same thing over and over.
But remember, great VR content, if it's interactive, changes every time.
That's correct. Yeah.
So you have to remember, the way you create VR content. As a kid, you probably all remember Choose Your Own Adventure books, right? So a Choose Your Own Adventure book is essentially a braiding narrative. and it branches and it braids and it allows you to direct yourself through that experience. As the first person in a VR experience, in a narrative context, we have the ability actually to be telling stories that are not linear.
Correct.
Okay? Which is totally different than anything that's ever been done before. It's essentially the ability to walk around the movie, and at that moment, or the TV show, the moment of Game of Thrones, you go, you know, I'm really not into that storyline. Like, I would be much more interested in seeing that storyline. Turn right, turn left, turn around, and then that opens up basically a new narrative that's branched. So it requires, as you can imagine, it requires a huge amount of planning and a huge amount of thought in terms of that kind of script creation. But there are now storytellers who are writing sort of hub-based narrative.
That's how games.
That's how games work. Exactly.
Yeah.
And games, of course, the reason kids will play games or adults will play games or whoever will play games for a long time is if they're rich enough and the story is interesting enough and you feel like you have enough agency that you're actually telling that story, then that's worth playing more than once.
So do you think in VR there'll be new worlds? You start a VR and then you just keep adding to it, like in the game industry?
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure. Absolutely.
One of the fears
So-
though that I have, and you know, when we talk about this, you know, it's this weird kind of middle zone between gaming for, say, like an open world kind of story where they're maybe used to that in certain games, and then the filmmaking world where it's a super linear, just this is the story. And you know, when I do some of these, like I want to be taken on the journey that a director, a visionary, an author has in mind, and that's the story. I think there's a reason I get a little nervous about Choose Your Own Adventure because
No one won a Pulitzer Prize for Choose Your Own.
100%.
Right.
Yeah, there's who's the great, you know, author there? Nobody.
Right.
So it's tough because you want to give people agency and to be able to interact, but you don't
How
want
much
them
agency is the question?
Yeah.
I mean,
But
because if you're just looking around.
But remember, I hear you, but remember, you're still creating that world. Someone is writing that world.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the richness of that world and the quality of the storytelling isn't truly determined. One of the fallacies of VR is that, well, what happened to the director in VR? At Sundance, that's all everyone said was, well, if I'm a filmmaker and I'm handing over, and I'm jumping into this technology, have I lost my control of the story? And the answer is no. You just need to be adept at figuring out how you want to shape the world of that narrative differently.
Yeah.
And
You just
so
don't have a frame.
You don't have a frame.
That's all you lose.
And it's not going like this, right?
No.
It's going like this. And that's, you know, that makes things more complex, but if I really genuinely think that there will be people who, I mean, we're already seeing it, who will become masters at that.
It's funny. I feel like you're dating me because I remember the first time I saw Far Away, a game, and it was just this whole world that was way beyond anything that's ever been on a video game. It was like a revelation. I remember running down the street to call my friend and say, "You got to come over and see this game we just bought." I'm sorry, Joe.
Well, I mean, you asked about the business model. Like for us,
Yeah.
like in a blunt, simple way, like we're all about making really big budget stuff and selling it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's just kind of in our core business. But he talked about the profound difference between mobile and tethered. A really kind of nerdy technical term is 3 degrees of freedom versus 6 degrees.
Right.
3 degrees means you can look everywhere, but you can't move.
Right.
6 degrees means you can start moving in that space. So the Martian's 6 degrees, all the tethered systems are 6 degrees. But we know mobile is that first bite at the apple that the whole world's going to have access to. So we're making a $7 million feature film told in like little 10-minute chapters that's just 3 degrees. It's meant to be consumed mobile. People could get it for cardboard, but we'd rather they buy it bundled with a better headset that is going to be a lot more comfortable and a lot better optically. And when we model it out, and it's like, all you need is a smartphone, and you can buy this for a couple $100. You have the headset and this movie. And
So you think it's going to be bundled with the headset, or are you going to sell it independently?
we're
in
going
the
to sell it
store?
individually
Right.
and bundled with a cardboard or some
So you're
sort
going
of
to
other
tell us
low
about what
cost.
price range?
Well, the cardboard or low cost headsets are in that, you know.
No, we're talking about
$10,
the range of
$20.
the software.
I think for that one, we're playing with different pricing models, but it's like $10 for a 12-minute episode, or if you pay $20, you get the first 6 episodes. Things like that. I mean,
Right.
I think the iTunes store gives us all a lot of lessons about the ways different consumers
Yeah.
buy content or buy episodes.
It depends on also, think of it this way. If I buy an Oculus setup now, I'm paying $600 for a headset, and I'm paying really $1,500 to $2,000.
But you are paying. You will. You've already ordered it, right? You
Yeah,
just
well,
said-
yeah.
Or you've
Fox
got
bought
one.
it
You
from
already
me. But someone's buying that.
Yeah.
You're spending. You're all in at least $2,000 to $2,500
yeah.
bucks. Okay,
Right.
so that early adopter, which is the same early adopter that bought the first iPad, the first iWatch, the first, we know that. We
Yeah.
know that there are certain people
The
out
first
there
PlayStation.
that just want it and will pay for it. So for the tethered content, yes, there's going to be a premium for that content, but the expectation is that it will be richer, it will be longer. For mobile, it's more complicated
Right.
because obviously, qualitatively, it's different. The length of it is different. But I think what Joel's saying is it's true. You start thinking about app downloads, right? In the iTunes store or the Android store, what does it cost to download a high-quality app or a high-quality game? You kind of know what that price point is.
And I think I'm not one for hyperbole at all, but I think 2016 is by far the most important year for VR because this is the year that it becomes a real business with income. When all these headsets get shipped and they have their stores, people are going to go on them and they're going to start buying content. And as soon as we have all that income coming into the ecosystem, I think that changes everything.
I think it'll be a fascinating year. This is the year. Oculus is shipping. They say April.
March 28th is
March
when I was
28th.
told mine's shipping.
Okay, that's when you're shipping. Well, some of us are a little late.
8 a.m.
So, good.
Day of.
We've run out of time, but we do have questions. And we have this little wonderful box that's foam that has a microphone in it. So who would like, there's any questions? We got a bunch of them here. I knew it. I have to say, the audience was leaning forward by that. I didn't see anybody sleeping, too. Yes,
Hello?
just speak in.
I have a
I'll just
question.
yell.
You're close.
Just yell.
The question from us is, why do you have that box?
It's supposed to be a
throw it.
mic.
You
It
throw
is
it
a
around.
mic.
Throw it
It's
around.
That's
mic.
cool.
There's
Okay,
a mic
I
in
like
it. It's a
it.
wonderful thing. You can
Innovative.
throw it. You don't have to
Yeah.
walk across.
nice.
It's the
Hi
first time I've
guys,
seen
my
that.
name's Leah. Thank you guys so much for being here. So there's a lot of talk from the AR folk that they are the VR killer, Magic Leap, what have you. Like to get your thoughts on that. And as pure VRists, what do you think is needed to cross the chasm from sampling to adoption?
Who wants to tackle AR?
We're doing a bunch of AR right now. From a content standpoint, like a lot of the same tools are what you're using to create AR. I think some of the ways like everybody here is doing for live action stuff in terms of capturing that spherical video. With AR, you get into needing to actually have it as a three-dimensional asset more. So the kind of real cutting edge of volumetric capture just isn't there yet, but it'll get there. And I think that will be a huge game changer for all of us to be able to have video assets placed within 6-degree environments. All I need is a light, tight box for AR to be VR. Right? Like I think teenagers are going to have hoods that zip up over their head, over their glasses, so that all of a sudden my AR glasses that give me data with the real world becomes a theater where I can go into Game of Thrones episodes.
I think the expectation is that they'll merge eventually, and you could easily have an experience with the right kind of headset where you start in AR in the real world,
Right.
and then suddenly
Yeah.
it cuts you off and you're in totally other world. So I think at some point it'll just maybe it'll be VR, maybe it'll be MR, but it'll be another thing that's everything.
Yeah, you'll be able to blend and go back and forth from seeing this world right now with other things in it and completely immersed and eventually not knowing if you're in one space or another.
Having seen quite a bit of AR, I would say that it's further off. It is a truly astounding technology in concept. And what it can do and what it will do could be really surprising. I mean, for example, this gentleman here has been sort of taking notes on his laptop during the presentation or the panel. I was lucky enough to see some stuff that they're developing at Magic Leap. You won't have computers, really. I mean, we won't have computers. We may not have cell phones. We will essentially have glasses on and say, computer, laptop sitting here. You won't need to carry much hardware with you, and immediately that keyboard pops up in front of you. You have the ability to see everything around you. You have the ability to still be present in the quote-unquote real world, but you can be computing. And all that's being done, essentially on a pretty small pair of glasses. So that then you start to think about, well, okay, what are the implications for design and implications for, everything from, calling Time Warner Cable or DirecTV and telling them, you probably still have to wait 5 hours, but once you get them on the phone, they'll be able to tell you, look at your set-top box, they'll see exactly what you see. Your car breaks down. I mean, there's a million, obviously medicine, huge.
It'll be bigger in
architecture,
industrial.
huge.
I think about someone fixing a nuclear plant.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Someone's
heard
actually
AR.
watching it.
Or a bomb technician.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
wire to cut.
There was a saying about AR once that I heard that was it's going to be the death of the screen.
Right.
Because there's going to be no need for
Yeah.
screens anymore.
Right.
So even if you have a cell phone, it might just be a brick, and you take it out, and then 3D display pops out of it. Because that's when you think in that way, this is way beyond what I'm capable of right now. But that's exciting. That's the future.
Hi, I went to the VR LA Winter Expo last weekend, which was awesome. I did some of the VR you're talking about where you move around. I shot zombies in the Walking Dead truck.
Yep.
And then I shot robots in the Servios game
a lot of
where
shooting.
you had
And then
5
I
different
shot
weapons.
werewolves, and then I shot
Lots of
zombies.
cool stuff. But can we come up with a terminology for for moving around? Because in the conference, I used to use active VR, and then you use tethered VR, which seems weird because you're moving around. Why call that tethered? And then you use 6 degrees. Can we just figure out what this is going to be called when you actually can move and
I think
walk around?
I think
Because
I think
really breaking,
interactive. We tend to use interactive. Tethered only mean, just to be clear, tethered only means that the headset is tethered to a computer, literally physically tethered.
You still move around.
If you're describing that to my mom, I'm like, oh, the tethered VR. She's like, what?
The distinction
Your
is
mom,
gonna
your
be-
mom
with
gets
tethered?
everything else about VR, but not the tethered part.
I'll bet you were
True,
tethered
true.
when you were a young kid. She'll get
that
it.
distinction is a really temporary technology gap right now.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
CES, Intel and Ion partnered and did a full untethered tethered experience. They used a mobile phone to do a 6-degree experience. So once all phones have that, there will be no 3-degree VR at all. It'll be like silent movies or black and white movies where they just stop making it.
can we agree active VR kind of captures the fact that even with a mobile phone, moving around. When
Yeah.
we get to
Yes,
that,
active
that's fine.
active versus passive is good.
Okay, so let's
we
do
can
it.
agree
Active
on that.
versus passive. Good.
Yeah,
All right,
that
cool.
works.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good to see so many VR people in one place. Eva Blaisdell. I launched a virtual reality company last week with operational teams in Paris, Singapore, and Los Angeles. My courage came from the fact that for about a year and a half, I'm investing in space as a media platform and entertainment. And part of our business model is to expedite deployment of what you guys were addressing, which is physical locations where people can consume and gather up to enjoy the content creation. And the fact that we are developing California Space Center next to Vandenberg to watch rocket launches is an example where we want to make a fabulous, hopefully, deployment of this type of experiences, plus some other destination places relevant to space. Our business model includes, of course, NASA and our own space content, but also possibility of collaborative around business models, content costs, production. And I'm asking this question on behalf of my international team as we are trying to evolve our innovation around partnerships, especially with the industry here in Los Angeles. And also my Silicon Valley people who
Eva,
are
what's the question?
developing. A question is technology development, partnership alliances, so we can help each other evolve market much faster, and streaming into the virtual reality, which I know it's not possible now, but perhaps you can comment on that.
Well, streaming is
Streaming is
possible.
possible.
Yeah, that's the core of it. That's the core of our business. So we do a lot of it right now is being applied to sports, but there's a lot of experiential and things that will be live, such as letting millions of people eventually all go to the summit of Mount Everest at the same time and experience that and look around live, or deep sea, underwater, and undersea laboratory. Those are all things that can be done now. It's just a matter of getting the cameras and people there with the technology.
You had a question there.
Hi there, I'm Abigail Staples. I'm a first-year student at Kellogg. My question is, what marketing techniques do you think the industry will need to use, given that virtual reality's value prop is best realized by actually being in use?
Showing people in amazing virtual spaces rather than showing people with a thing slapped to their face.
Yeah.
I think that's one of them. I mean, if people could see someone on Mars being Mark Watney, I think that would be a more powerful marketing image than the thing we keep seeing of the.
Yeah, one of the things that I did last year in my what I call my day job, working on trailers and traditional 2D work, we did a spot for Morpheus last year for E3, and one of the things that I really liked that they did was we put the headset on as a wireframe over their head, because you can't just like record somebody with a headset on and you don't see their face hardly. So it was like a CG kind of Tony Stark wireframe, and you could see their expressions and all that. And when that came out, it got a really good reaction, because you're like, finally, you can actually see people like enjoying it, and in that world, it's same kind of thing where you show them in some sort of world, and it's not. There's a thing that we have to fight against. The VR is isolating. It looks that way from the outside maybe, but once you do it, it's a very different thing. And so making sure that as we show people and try to get them to consume our content, that it's not like, cut you off, see you later, this is done, this is my thing now, like that it's something that is really enjoyable and really emotional.
Yeah, I think communal is a big thing you're gonna start to see. Every 6 months there's some giant leap in terms of what we're seeing in the technology. Again, having just come back from CES and Sundance, what I think is going to be the next wave of VR content will be social VR content. And that is essentially, could mean that DJ allows for someone to be viewing a VR experience where you're on the floor of a Clippers game together. It could be viewing your favorite content in the Netflix app within Gear VR together and watching a show. So you're here, your family or your friend is on the road. You guys go into essentially what is a chat room and decide that you want to watch some form of content together. Then we talk about interactive experiences. There absolutely already are a series of experiences that we've seen where you are in a virtual environment with other people. Yeah. Those virtual environment could be, the other people could actually be physically right here, so all of us could put on headsets and walk around that space, or we could all be in different places but all be in the same virtual environment. So social, I think, is a really important thing that you're going to start to see too.
And remember who bought Oculus.
Yeah, I think Zuckerberg thought that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that was actually
it would be pretty cool to be sitting there next to Steve Ballmer under the Clippers basket, and you might be dangerous. He might knock you over. But have you thought of something like that? Where
it's
you're
coming.
next to a celebrity.
You may those are all coming, whether it's a concert or a film. Maybe sitting next to your favorite actor at the screening of a new film, whether it's Mars or Martian or something like that. But the same thing with a basketball game. You'll be sitting there, and next to you is
Billy Crystal,
or it could be Steph Curry or someone else who's you're talking to and watching the game. If it's another game, it might be your favorite fan.
That's pretty amazing. We're out of time, so that's it. I'd like to thank the panel here. Great job. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.